Suicide. Still, while the traps were very effective, they were ultimately only a delaying measure. They could inflict some damage, but they could not eliminate the skeleton riders by themselves. The fallen skeleton riders rose to their feet, covered in mud. Just then, there was a whoosh and the sound of the air parting. Just like that, one of the fallen skeleton riders had its head knocked off. The skeleton riders judged this to be enemy action and looked around. Just then, another skeleton rider's head flew off its shoulders, shattered like a glass marble. The skeleton riders spotted 3 lizard men about 80 meters away from them. They also saw them launching stones from the slings in their hands, crushing the skulls of the skeleton riders. The skeleton riders began moving. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit. At the same time, the battle situation with the skeletons began to change. After the sound of countless bowstrings being pulled taut, the sound of arrows filled the air like the falling of rain. The 150 skeleton archers fired at the melee with the skeletons and the lizard men. They did not just discharge 1 arrow each, but 2, 3. The lizard men had not expected an arrow storm like that. Many lizard men were hit by arrows and collapsed. They could not fight the skeletons and block the arrow attacks at the same time. Of course, the skeletons were hit by the arrows as well, but they were not hurt. Using the skeletons, who were nigh immune to piercing damage, as screens, and then having the skeleton archers fire from behind them was a near-perfect strategy. They would have enough time to wipe out all the lizard men in the time it would take to bash through the 2,000 skeletons screening them. The problem was that they had used that tactic too late. If they had opened with that move, the fate of the lizard men would have been sealed. They would have been drowned under the overwhelming tide of enemy forces and victory would have been decided. However, the outcome of the battle was largely decided by this point. The lizard men ignored the skeletons and charged the skeleton archers in the rear. 150 arrows fell like rain, and several lizard men hit the ground as a result. Yet, that was only a small portion of their forces. The lizard men had thick skin and strong scales, so even without armor, they had the same defensive strength as humans in leather armor. Even if an arrow somehow pierced their hides, their thick layer of muscles kept them alive. In addition, the skeleton archers did not have much strength behind their draws. That was another reason why they could not kill the lizard men. The lizard men roared fearlessly as they charged. They crossed their arms over their heads as the arrow storm fell upon them, and even if they were impaled by the shafts, they continued regardless. 3 arrows, this was the most each of the skeleton archers managed to loose. If they had any intelligence, they would have fallen back. It would have been better if they retreated for the moment, and then regrouped to engage the surviving undead troops. However, the skeletons' minds could not process such complicated orders, and such orders had not been given anyway. Therefore, they could only do as they had been told, keep firing on the lizard men even if they get close. There was a mighty roar, and then the skeletons and skeleton archers alike drowned under the rising tide of lizard men. The skeleton archers could no longer show their stuff at this range. Their part was to be punching bags for their enemies, and so they fell steadily, in 2s and 3s. Currently, the zombies were still alive, but the skeletons had been almost completely beaten into the ground. This was when the enemy sent out new foes. Those were the beast zombies. These monsters, made from the corpses of wolves, snakes, pythons, and other such creatures, combined the strength of zombies and the agility of wild animals. The beast zombies ran at the lizard men. The swift ones surged ahead while the slow ones lagged behind. It was a ragged charge with no formation to speak of. Attacks from below were unexpectedly hard to avoid. The beast zombies would tear at their foes' legs and finish them off once they were immobilized. It was a truly savage combat technique. The increasingly fatigued lizard men had a hard time warding off these attacks. Several lizard men were too slow to avoid having their throats torn out by the beast zombies. After seeing their comrades fall, even the ones who had steeled themselves for combat, or believed in ancestral protection, could not hide the looks of fear on their faces. The head warriors had led their men into the bloody fray, but now they were gradually being forced back. Just as they thought the line of battle would eventually break, the ground before them swelled. Before them appeared two armless and legless lumps of mud, around 160 centimeters tall. The two clumps of mud began moving. They had no legs, but they moved adroitly and smoothly over the wetlands, towards the beast zombies. After closing the distance, the mud clumps sprouted whips that were longer than them from the places where a human's arms would have been. This was one of the trump cards of the lizard men, the swamp spirits summoned by the combined efforts of all the priests. The swamp spirits charged into the beast zombies and attacked with their tentacle-like whip arms, seizing the enemy. Naturally, the beast zombies fearlessly counterattacked, slashing with claws and tearing with fangs. This was a battle between beings that knew no fear. However, the tide turned in favor of the swamp spirits, purely because of the difference between their fighting strengths. The power of their priests had defeated the unliving. This fact rekindled the lizardmen's courage, and they rallied for another charge. A brutal battle ensued. Unlike the previous fight with the skeletons, the lizard men began to take casualties. However, victory was at hand for the lizard men, who had the advantage of numbers. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit, we will lose. Cocytus understood that much. There were no intelligent undead among the forces he had been assigned. That was the main cause of their defeat, and something which had worried him from the start, but he had not expected them to be that weak. Cocytus's head ached at his naivete. While there was a way to turn the tables in a situation like this, he did not favor it much, because making that move was tantamount to admitting defeat. Still, how could he report failure to his master? Cocytus picked up the message scroll. Who should he send this message to? Demiurge? Indeed it is, old friend. Why would you contact me? Has something happened? A calm, even voice spoke in Cocytus's mind. Demiurge's intelligence was top class in Nazarick. Surely he would have an idea for a situation like this. On a certain level, Demiurge could also be considered a rival of his, so Cocytus was not too happy about asking him for help. Still, the most important thing was to avoid defeat. How could the armies of the great underground tomb of Nazarick be beaten in battle? He was willing to cast aside his pride and bow before others for help in order to avoid that outcome. Actually, after hearing a scroll's worth of explanation about the current situation, Demiurge, who had been listening quietly, sighed in exasperation. Then, what do you want me to do? I hope you can help me think of something. If this carries on, we will be defeated. I can accept a personal defeat, but I cannot allow the great tomb of Nazarick, the supreme beings, to be disgraced. In such a way. Do you think Ain Sama truly wishes for victory? What do you mean? I am saying, why do you think Ain Sama picked out such low-tier fodder for an army? Cocytus had harbored his doubts about that point. He had no idea what reason could warrant drafting the dregs of Nazarick into a fighting force. Ain Sama must have his own motives. But what could they be? There are several possibilities that come to mind. That's Demiurge for you. Cocytus did not say that, though his respect for the demon grew in silence. Let me ask you something, Cocytus. You've been there for several days now. Don't you think you should have gathered intelligence on the lizard men? He was right. However, no, Ain Sama ordered me to defeat the foe with that force in a head-on confrontation. That is indeed the case, but I hope you will think carefully on it, Cocytus. The important thing is what sort of results you will show Ain Sama, am I wrong? If exterminating the village was the objective, Then you should have considered the ideal methods for extermination, don't you think? Cocytus had nothing to say, because Demiurge had hit the nail on the head. Ain Sama must have assigned you those servants, because he had that in mind. You mean to say that Ain Sana, deliberately, assigned me inadequate troops? The possibility is very high. If you had researched the village beforehand, perhaps you would have known that your forces would be insufficient to conquer the village. In that event, you would have told Ain Sama that, exterminating the village will be difficult with these forces, I wish to request reinforcements. That was most likely Ain Sama's objective. In other words, Demiurge was trying to say that Cocytus had to divine his master's intent and adapt his methods to the situation, not follow orders blindly. This seems to be one of Ain Sama's plans to improve the way in which we approach matters, but he seems to have other objectives in mind as well. Other objectives? Cocytus hurriedly asked Demiurge. He had already erred once, and he did not wish to further add to his mistakes. Ain Sama sent messengers to the village, but he did not state Nazarik's name at all. In addition, he ordered you not to take the field. That being the case, Cocytus gulped as he waited for Demiurge to continue speaking. However, Demiurge did not. Cocytus. Forgive me, something urgent has cropped up. I apologize, but let's leave our conversation here. Good luck. Demiurge's words cut off and the message ended. As Cocytus wondered what would panic a calm person like him, his gaze shifted to someone else seated at a table within the room. He saw Antoma peeling a tattered talisman from her forehead and casting it down. If she, a talismancer, was using a talisman, that meant it was too late for anything else. That being the case, now was the time to deploy the final undead being, his trump card. However, would that really fulfill his master's aims? This might be the first time Cocytus had contemplated his master's true underlying motives. However, there was only one conclusion he could reach. Cocytus cast the message spell. Heed me, Elder Lich Commander. Attack and show the lizardmen your power. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit. The bony body, dressed in a luxurious, but time-worn set of robes, clutched a gnarled staff in one of its hand. Its skin was a thin layer stretched over the skull underneath, and it was beginning to rot, and it bore a malevolent intelligence within its eyes. Its body radiated negative energy like a mist which shrouded it. This undead magic caster was the Elder Lich in question. After receiving its orders, the undead creature looked over the marsh. Then it turned to the blood-meat hulks, undead creatures that were masses of red skin and muscle, behind it. To these fellow creations of the same supreme being, he gave an order: kill those 3 lizard men. Upon receipt of those orders, the 2 blood-meat hulks lumbered out towards the 3 lizard men, who were devastating the skeleton riders. While the blood-meat hulks were low-tier undead, who could only attack with brute strength, they possessed the power of regeneration. As a result, it would take a long time to bring them down with physical attacks on their level. The Elder Lich felt that the blood-meat hulks could buy him enough time. This could be considered a foolish strategy. The Elder Lich was a magic caster, and not used to melee combat, so under normal circumstances, it would have been better to keep the blood-meat hulks by his side. However, he could not do that now. His orders were to show the lizardmen your power. Therefore, he had to proceed alone and destroy the lizardman headquarters with his overwhelming might. The Elder Lich advanced. Its face twisted into a fearsome shape as it chuckled. He felt that this was a piece of cake. He had been personally made by the supreme being Ain's Olgaun, and he was far superior to the automatically spawning Elder Liches in Nazarik. And now, his task was to demonstrate his puissance to the lizard men. He swore to achieve victory by the name his master had given him. I, Igva, shall dedicate this triumph to my liege. Part 4. After wiping out the beast zombies, the lizard men rounded their shoulders in fatigue and breathed sighs of relief. There was anguish on their faces, but at the same time there were faint smiles there. It was true that they had taken many casualties, but they were lucky only to have sustained that much. If the swamp spirits had not joined the fight, no, if they had come in just a little later, their formation would have collapsed, and it would have turned into a rout. "We're moving out," shouted the head warriors. It was an announcement that they were heading into battle. Their bodies were weak from fatigue, and just raising their weapons consumed a great deal of effort, to say nothing of actually wielding them. They were bone-tired, but the battle was not yet over. They had to beware the enemy's reinforcements even as they eliminated the distant zombies. "All right, get the heavily wounded back to the village, the rest of you form up on us," the sound of roaring fire interrupted him. Searing heat engulfed the surroundings, and the swamp spirits at the center of the blaze wavered. As the flames vanished like they had never been there in the first place, the two spirits were in terrible shape. A single gout of fire had half destroyed them. Before the lizard men could cry out in surprise, the fires raged once more. The spirits could not endure the attacks and disintegrated into the roaring inferno. As the swamp spirits, who had demonstrated incredible power against the beast zombies, disappeared without a trace, the lizardmen's faces went blank, unable to keep pace with what was happening before them. What had just happened? They knew that the swamp spirits had been destroyed, but they were desperately trying to deny that reality. That was because if the swamp spirits really had been destroyed, it meant that there was a more powerful monster headed their way. The lizard men looked around in confusion, and also to hide their fear. Just as they spotted an undead being in the distance, a fireball once more flew from its hand. The head-sized ball of flame soared through the air in a straight line, and flew into the leader squad of the lizard man troops. Under normal circumstances, flames would vanish upon contact with water. However, this fireball was a magical phenomenon and defied that logic. When the fireball touched the water, it was as though it had struck a hard surface. A roaring cyclone of flame blossomed from the point of impact. The fiery explosion consumed several lizard men, and then faded away. Was this an illusion? That thought vanished in an instant. The smell of charred meat wafting in the air, and the bodies of lizard men slumped on the ground was real enough. The undead creature advanced with unhurried steps, so elegant that one might take it for arrogance. That was the stride of a mighty being, fully confident in its power. As the lizard men hesitated about whether they should rush it with an all-out attack, just like how they had destroyed the skeleton archers, another fireball flew at them. The fireball exploded violently, claiming the lives of all the lizard men around it in an instant. This was overwhelming power. It made people think that everything which had happened just now was little more than a game. "Yua!" The lizard men shouted to clear the fear from their hearts. Just as several lizard men charged recklessly ahead, a cold, clear voice spoke from what seemed like an unthinkably great distance: "Utter foolishness." That was all their foe said. The onrushing lizard men were incinerated by a ball of flame before they could scream. The undead being took a step forward, and over 100 lizard men immediately took one step back. The disparity between their powers was like a high wall which forced the lizard men to retreat. "Run away!" A strident, electrifying cry filled the air. The voice belonged to one of the head warriors. "That one's different from the ones before him. We can't take him." That much was true. The majestic sight of the elder lich slowly advancing by itself was an awesome one. It made the lizard men feel as though a mighty wind was blowing across their skin. "Go inform the chiefs and Zariusu about this. We'll try to buy time." Another fireball exploded, and several more lizard men lay upon the ground. "Run! Go tell them." The 5 head warriors ordered the lizard men to flee, and at the same time they judged the distance between them. They were spacing themselves out so even when a fireball burst, at least one of them would be able to close the gap to the enemy. It was a suicidal tactic designed to accomplish that objective. After spreading themselves out, the 5 of them looked at each other, and then sprinted. The enemy was roughly 100 meters away. They despaired at the distance separating them, but even so, they ran with all their might. That was because even if they perished halfway, their deaths would still give the chiefs and Zariusu information they could use. Diamond suit, the lizard men, who had effortlessly held off the enemy, came running back like a flock of frightened birds. Zarius calmly observed that sight. No, ever since that powerful foe appeared, he had been scrutinizing its every movement. His attention was focused on the undead being that could cast the killing fire. Its movements were completely different from the mindless foes from before. In all likelihood, that was the enemy commander. As the undead creature closed to within 100 meters of the five-head warriors, it began using fireball to execute area of effect attacks. This forced them to scatter, and it seemed intent on burning the head warriors to death during their run. Looks like it's time for us to take the field. Zarius nodded at Zenburu's words. Crush signaled her agreement as well. She was aware that this might well be a battle, where they might all meet a glorious end. Yes, it's time for us to go. Its power is shocking. Our foe might well be the personal subordinate of that Supreme One, or the commander of this army. Even if it's not, it must surely be a trump card of some sort. Indeed. Nobody can control multiple undead of such a level. But how shall we make our move? It seems a bit too far away for us. Crush's question gave Zarius a headache. They were not fighting to die, so they had to plan around that. Zarius and Zenburu could not attack at range, so they had to close in for a melee. The problem now lay in the 100 meters between them and the enemy. Zarius and the others could probably take 1 or 2 fireballs with ease, but they would probably take more than just 1 or 2 such hits before reaching their opponent, and the true struggle would begin once they got to it. It was not hard to see how the enemy would repulse them if they tried a frontal assault while taking fireball attacks. That distance is pretty daunting. Yeah, you got that right. To think 100 meters could feel so far away, Zarius and friends wondered how they could reach the enemy with no or minimal damage. How about burrowing through the ground? If we used priestly powers, it'd still be hard. If we could use invisibility, they could probably close the gap instantly by going invisible and using the fly spell. However, druids could not cast such spells. Then how about making a shield and advancing with it held before us? Making a shield would take too long. How about tearing one of the houses down and using it as a shield? Zenburu smiled bitterly as he realized the futility of the words he had just spoken. The enemy attacked with explosive fireballs. Even if it was blocked, the searing temperatures would still scorch them from the side. There was no time now to make a full-body shield which could withstand high temperatures. Ah, yes, we can still do that. What is it, Zarius? Crush asked nervously, feeling a little afraid. Is my face so scary? Zarius wondered. Still, it could not be helped. After all, he was so stressed out that he wanted to scream. A shield, you say? I think I just found one. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit. Igva nodded, pleased with himself and the present situation. Things were going very well. The blood-meat hulks were still fighting, but he had successfully advanced to the village. Several stupid lizardmen had tried to attack him, but after seeing the power of his fireballs, they realized that resistance was futile. The most successful attackers were the 5 who had split up to rush him, but even they had only managed to get within 50 meters of him. Igva walked on in silence, like he was strolling through an empty wasteland. While he pitied the weak lizard men, albeit in a mocking fashion, it would not do to be careless. He was close to the village, his objective. Once there, he intended to continuously launch fireballs to destroy the lizardmen with their village. However, the lizardmen would probably try to stop him from reaching his destination. That would mean it was about time for the next counterattack. Igva looked to the village, and his suspicions were vindicated. Oh, I see. Igva saw a hydra coming at him. If that was their ace in the hole, then the lizardmen would lose the will to fight once he crushed it with overwhelming force. If that happened, he would be able to destroy the village more easily. For safety's sake, Igva looked around, then checked the sky, and halted only after verifying that there were no traces of the enemy. He leisurely waited for the hydra to enter his attack range. As the hydra reached the edge of said range, it began to sprint. As expected, it was heading straight for Igva. How foolish. Did you think you could crawl all the way to me with that slothful speed of yours? Well, beasts will be beasts. With a mocking smile on his face, Igva conjured a fireball in his hand and launched it at the Hydra. It flew in a straight line and struck the Hydra dead center. The searing fires which emerged consumed the Hydra. However, the Hydra continued forward, albeit a little shaky on its feet. It continued running, though it was wreathed in flames. No, the flames had gone out in an instant, so Igva must have been seeing things. That said, the sight before him spoke of the Hydra's extraordinary willpower. Igva frowned in displeasure. The fact that it could withstand one of his magical attacks was a blow to his pride. While it was true that the Hydra seemed to have been enchanted with a defensive spell to reduce the damage it had taken, said defensive spell was not of a high tier, and could not completely nullify his magic. If I recall correctly, Hydras have the ability of fast healing, but it shouldn't be able to withstand flame attacks. In any case, it's a beast, so it should be full of vitality. In that case, it makes sense that it could take a hit. That reasoning comforted Igva somewhat, but it could not douse the flames of rancor within his heart. Igva was a special monster who had been personally created by the supreme being Ainz Ul Gaun. The fact that this creature had not died in one hit was an insult to his master. With cold eyes that were the polar opposite of the anger smoldering within him, Igva studied the oncoming Hydra. How displeasing. Die. He cast another fireball at the Hydra, and the roaring flames engulfed its body. For a moment he even thought he could smell its flesh charring from the distance. Even if his foe had not taken a fatal wound, surely it would hesitate over whether or not to continue forward. However, why is it not stopping? Why does it persist? Part 5. Rororo continued its single-minded sprint forward. Its body was large, but it was running in the marsh, so its speed was about the same as that of a lizard man. Water splashed in all directions and a liquid cacophony echoed all around it. Its amber eyes had turned cloudy from the great heat, and 2 of its 4 heads hung powerlessly. Even so, it continued sprinting forward. Another fireball came, striking Rororo's body. The thermal energy contained within the fireball exploded forth, and washed all over it. The pain was like being beaten all over its body. Its eyes felt drier than ever before, and the superheated air seared its lungs. Its entire body was burned, and the agony that had been racking Rororo from just now told it that if it continued, its very life was forfeit. Even so, it continued running. It ran. It ran on. It continued forward, never stopping. The high temperatures stripped the scales from its skin and causing blood-spurting blisters to blossom upon it, but even so it carried on, straight ahead. An unintelligent beast would naturally have turned and fled, but Rororo did not do so. Rororo was a magical beast called a Hydra. There were many kinds of magical beasts. Some possessed greater intelligence than a human being and some were little wiser than an average animal. Frankly speaking, Rororo belonged to the latter category. The fact that Rororo, who possessed the wits of an average beast, would continue forward, on the verge of death, towards Igva, the source of its pain was entirely unexpected, nearly impossible to understand. Indeed, even its opponent Igva found it difficult to understand. He wondered if Rororo was under the influence of some magical control. However, that was not the case. Indeed, that was not the answer. Igva would not be able to understand it. Rororo, possessed of an animal's intelligence, was running with all its might for its kin. Rororo had never seen its parents, yet Hydras were not the sort of creatures to abandon their offspring. Beasts of their kind would live with one of their parents until a certain age, learning how to survive in the wild. But then, why did this not apply to Rororo? That was because Rororo was a mutant. Normal Hydras had 8 heads when born, and as they grew older, they sprouted more heads, to a maximum of 12. However, Rororo only had 4 heads at birth, so its parents had abandoned it, taking its siblings with them. Without the protection of its parents, even a young Hydra, who might someday grow into a powerful creature, would surely perish in the harsh environs of nature. That is, if a certain lizard man had not passed by and picked it up. And so Rororo gained kin, a father, a mother, and a close friend, all rolled into one. As Rororo's mind was about to break under the agony, it recalled a question it had always pondered in the past. Why was its body so big? Why did it have so many heads? It occasionally thought that as it looked at the dear parent who had raised it. As a result, Rororo had also thought of something else. Perhaps one day some of its heads might fall off, and its body might slowly sprout limbs like the way grass grew, and it would look like its parent. And if that really happened, what would it ask for? Yes. They had not slept together in a long time, so perhaps it would ask to curl up and nap together. It had always felt lonely because it had become too big, and they had to sleep apart. The flames felt like they were burning away Rororo's thoughts. They filled his vision, and the agony shot through his body once more. It moaned in pain as the anguish washed over it. It felt a comforting warmth from behind, but it was nothing compared to the fire-consuming Rororo. Rororo felt as though it were being smashed by countless iron hammers. It hurt so much that it could no longer think. Rororo's legs seized up, signaling to the rest of the creature that it should stop moving forward. However, was that really enough to make Rororo stop? No. It did not stop. Rororo continued advancing. Its pace had slowed. Its muscles were burnt and stiff, and it could not continue running at its usual pace. It suffered with every step it took. It was difficult to breathe. Just drawing breath was hard. Perhaps its lungs had been seared. Even so, it did not stop. Now, only one of its heads could still move. The other motionless heads were little more than dead weight. The sight of the undead creature conjuring another fireball in its hand was a blurred scene in Rororo's cloudy vision. Its animal instincts allowed it to realize something. If it took another hit, it would die. However, Rororo was not afraid. Without stopping, without ceasing, it forged bravely ahead. This was a request from its father, mother, and friend. Therefore it would never stop. Just as Rororo desperately, and tiredly, dragged itself forward, a crimson ball of fire flew forth once more from an undead hand. It soared through the air and headed straight for Rororo. There was no doubt that this last attack would consume Rororo in flames. It was an undeniable fact. It would die. It would be the end of everything. However, indeed, that was only if the aforementioned lizard man did not step in. How could he watch Rororo die before him? How could he permit such an injustice to take place? That was impossible. Icy burst. Xerius shouted as he leapt from behind Rororo, swinging frost pane as he ran beside it. The air before the swing froze in an instant, forming a wall of white mist. This was a gout of supercooled air, the frozen wind of frost pane. That was one of frost pane's abilities. That was a special move which could only be used 3 times a day, icy burst. It snap froze everything in an area in front of it, and caused massive damage. The wall of frozen fog was solid, and it blocked the oncoming fireball. The orb of ardent flame met the wall of chill mist. By the laws of magic, allowing them to collide was the wisest choice. It hit, the scorching flames burst forth, warring with the frozen mist of ivory. It seemed as though 2 serpents, one white and one red, were trying to consume each other. After a moment's resistance, both powers vanished. The undead creature was shocked, and its surprise showed on its face. That was a natural reaction to seeing the dissipation of the spell it had discharged. There was still some distance between both parties. However, they could already see each other's faces and movements. Rororo's effort and determination had crossed the seemingly untraversable distance between them and brought the 3 of them unharmed to this place. Rororo, Xerius choked up. In the end, Xerius picked the most appropriate words he could think of from his vocabulary, a simple, easily understood phrase. Thank you. As he left those shouted thanks with Rororo, Xerius charged forward without looking back, trailed by Zenburu and Crush. An almost inaudible croak answered him. It was the sound of encouragement for its kin. Diamond Suit, Diamond Suit, Diamond Suit. Igva stared in silence. His fireball had been countered, and he could not stop himself from expressing his disbelief in words. This cannot be. Igva prepared to cast another spell. Naturally, it was still a fireball. He was not prepared to acknowledge that the lizardmen charging at him had actually neutralized his magic. The launched fireball streaked at the three lizardmen. The leading lizardman swung its sword and blocked the fireball, with a wall of freezing mist, and both vanished together. Yes, the same thing as just now had happened, bring it on. I'll cancel out everything you throw at me. The lizardman's furious cry entered his ears. Igva went in displeasure. To think a mere lizardman could deflect a spell from me, a creation of the supreme being Ain Sama. Igva worked to suppress his boiling anger. It was quite likely that he could not use fireball anymore. However, the fact that his opposition had taken shelter behind the Hydra and approached meant that there was probably a limit to the number of times that ability could be used. Still, he did not know if it could be used 10 times, or if every use would only deplete stamina, meaning that with the appropriate recovery it could be used without limit. How should I deal with this? I'd like to verify his words, if possible. Igva could still discharge fireballs, but he could not tell how much of the lizardman's words were truth or bravado. Less than 40 meters separated Igva from the lizardmen. In addition, the lizardman charging him looked like a warrior. As an undead magic caster, Igva did not wish to be drawn into a melee. Therefore, his fireballs could no longer be used. He was not stupid enough to actually test how many more times his opponent could block his techniques under the circumstances. If only they had not hid behind that Hydra, that is to say, if they had not yet closed the gap, he might have attempted to verify their claims. However, that damnable Hydra had ruined that chance. Damn, a mere Hydra. Igva cursed, and decided on his next move. Then how about this? By coincidence, his foes had strung themselves out into a straight line. Igva extended a ginger and pointed at the three lizard men who were pressing in. Electricity crackled around that digit. Taste my lightning. A stream of white electricity flashed forward, and then, Diamond Suit Zariusu was still some distance away, but he could see the white light coruscating around Igva's finger lightning. Frostpane's icy burst could defend against cold and fire elemental attacks, but Zariusu had never used it against lightning strikes, and he did not know if it would work. Then, would it be wiser to take a risk, or fan out to disperse the enemy's targets and minimize the damage taken? Zariusu gripped Frostpane tightly. He could feel the electrical surge in the air, the proof that the lightning strike was aimed at him. Leave it to me. Zenbru acted faster than Zariusu could, and leapt forward with a great cry. The spell discharged at the same time. Lightning. Resistance massive. Just when it seemed that the lightning bolt was about to pierce Zenbru, his body instantly pumped up. In the end, the electrical discharge which should have pierced him, and the two people behind him was scattered and deflected. Resistance massive. This was a monk ability, which discharged ki from the entire body to reduce magical damage. It was a technique Zenbru had learned during his travels, after losing to Frostpane's icy burst in the past. The technique could be used to defend against any spell which did damage, even if it did so in an area. Both sides gasped in surprise, but Zariusu and Crush, who believed in their comrade, were not overly shocked by this. Thus, while the undead magic caster reeled in surprise, the lizardmen drew ever closer. As he dashed forth, Zariusu suddenly realized something. If he had used Icy Burst during his duel with Zenbru, that move would have been countered by this technique, and Zenbru would have used the opening to defeat him. Perhaps that was why he had been trying to get Zariusu to use that move on him. Haha. Like falling off a log. Zariusu smiled at Zenbru's confident voice, but his face tightened up almost immediately afterwards. That was because Zariusu could hear an undercurrent of pain in his voice. If even a lizard man like Zenbru could not hold back his pain, that implied his wounds were not light. In addition, if that technique had no weaknesses, he would not have agreed to the plan of hiding behind Rororo. Zariusu looked ahead. Less than 20 meters separated them from their enemy. The great distance between them had shrunk that far. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit. As they drew closer, Igva realized that the people before him were powerful opponents, not to be taken lightly. The fact that they could counter his spells was worthy of praise. Of course, he had other ways to attack, but now he had to give some consideration to defense. You are excellent sacrifices, perfectly qualified for me to demonstrate my power. Igva smiled coldly as he cast his spell. Summon undead for th. Amidst a spray of bubbles, 4 skeletons emerged from the marsh to defend Igva, each holding round shields and curved swords. These undead were called skeleton warriors, and they were in a completely different league from regular skeletons. While he could have summoned other undead, he had chosen the skeleton warriors in order to resist cold attacks. Igva and other skeletal creatures like him were immune to cold damage. Protected by his bodyguard squad, Igva looked down upon the approaching enemy. It was the attitude of a reigning champion awaiting a challenger. The two of them finally drew near each other. Only 10 meters separated them now. They were only that far apart now. Yes, that was all the distance separating them. After making sure that the undead would not immediately launch an attack, he glanced behind himself. He looked at the distance they had traveled. It was very close if all they had to do was run it, but that 100 meters was a killing field without any cover. Without Rororo, Frostpain, Zenbrew, or Crush, he would never have been able to come this far. One could say it was as difficult as trying to ascend into the heavens. However, he had crossed that distance, and he was within reach of his foe. They had overcome that distance together. As Xerius saw the lizardmen take Rororo back to the village, he breathed a momentary sigh of relief. Then he chastised himself for his moment of laxity, and looked back at the undead before him. Xerius could frankly admit that they were fearsome foes. If he had encountered them under different circumstances, he would have immediately elected to flee upon sighting them from far away. Just by standing before them, his instincts were screaming at him to flee, and even his tail was standing on end. From the corner of his eye, Xerius noted that Zenbrew and Crush's tails were exhibiting similar reactions to his left and right. The two of them must be thinking the same thing as Xerius. Indeed, they were fighting the urge to flee as they faced the undead before them. Xerius swished his tail, swatting them across the back. The two of them looked at Xerius with looks of surprise on their faces. We can beat them if the three of us work together, Xerius said simply. Well said, Xerius. We can win. Crush used her tail to caress the spot on her back where Xerius had swatted her. Ha, now that would be something, wouldn't it? Zenbrew laughed, a look of pride on his face. And so, the three of them traveled the final stretch to their enemy. The distance between both sides was 8 meters. On one hand were Xerius and gang, who had run all the way here, and were panting. Facing them were the undead, who did not breathe. Their eyes met, and the enemy spoke first. I am Igva, an elder lich under the banner of the Supreme One. Bow before me and I will grant you a quick and painless death. Xerius could not help but smile, because this undead being called Igva knew nothing. No matter how hard he thought, there was only one answer. Xerius was smiling, but Igva was not displeased. Instead, he quietly awaited their answer. Igva knew his strength, and he was confident that he could eliminate Xerius and his companion.